All right, let's talk some basketball, shall we? We got 2 weeks left until the beginning of the NBA season, and right after we finished recording on Friday, the NBA dropped the first half of the season schedule, and they're only going to drop that first half because they're going to wait and see what's going to happen with some of these COVID cases during the season that are inevitably going to happen, and they're going to have to reschedule games. So this way they have a little bit more flexibility for if games get postponed, they can schedule them in that second half before they figure out the rest of the season, and then we'll just be able to push the playoffs back a little bit and fit those games in. As opposed to the NFL's approach that's just going, we're going to push through and you guys are going to play no matter what and screw you.
Well, we'll talk about that a little more as we get closer to the season, but the NBA seems to be adopting a hybrid approach between what the NFL has done. But I do like the postponing the scheduling of the second half so they can wait and see, especially because I think I saw one headline this weekend that 50 players have tested positive so far.
Yeah. And it also came down that they were going to take some strict precautions. So they're going to be keeping track of any of the players who are going to gathering outside of their state limits. I believe it was 15 on the headline. They're keeping track of people who are going to entertainment venues, just any like activities that put them at risk. The NBA is going to keep track of it, and that's why they have that snitch line open that they had open during the bubble for people to report players and coaches and staff who are breaking COVID protocols for the league. So they're really clamping down on that. And I think one of the ways they kind of incentivized helping out the players who now are going to complain about not having anything to do, they mentioned that they won't be testing for marijuana this season.
Hey.
So it looks like a lot of players are going to be sitting home getting baked, and J.R. Smith absolutely loves that news. Okay. We're going to talk about the schedule a little bit and some of the key games. The first of which is, of course, opening night. Very exciting. We get to see Kevin Durant playing against his former team, the Golden State Warriors, at 7 p.m. And it's in Brooklyn. Hopefully, Kyrie and KD will both be playing. Who knows? Maybe Harden will have joined them by then. I don't think so, but a lot of people would love to see that happen. And it'll be interesting to see. It'll be a great matchup of guards with Kyrie and Steph, and we'll get our first look at James Wiseman, and we'll get our first look at this Brooklyn Nets team that many have deemed to be one of the top contenders in the East.
I feel a bit criminal because when we previewed the Nets, we somehow neglected to mention that Steve Nash is the head coach. I don't know how we can say we love CanCon and not have mentioned that, but that's another huge part of the excitement about the Nets season for me.
Yeah, Steve, I mean, he was always a very high IQ player, and he's certainly going to have some ways of running this team. Mike D'Antoni is his assistant, which will be really, really helpful for him because D'Antoni has a great track record of being a successful coach. So it'll be our first look to see what Steve's going to drop, and maybe he'll be able to drop some good defensive concepts to shut down this Warriors offense, because Nash knows Curry's game well with the time that he's been an advisor for him. So that will be an interesting matchup to see. And then the second game on that opening night, of course, has to be the two LA teams going at it. And it'd just be great to see what sort of adjustments and energy this Clippers team is going to come out with the new head coach, Ty Lue. And who knows even if LeBron and AD will play in this game, just simply because I believe that they're going to try and rest earlier in the season because they've had less rest than every other team besides Miami, because they've played as recently as like a little under 2 months ago. So I think early in the season, you're going to see AD and LeBron get some rest, and that's kind of why they brought in Harrell and Schroeder to take on some of those minutes and take on some of those scoring duties. And so that kind of feeds into the other storyline is Harrell is going to go up against his old team. He was frustrated with it, the culture. There's been a lot of stories coming out about players like Beverly and Lou Williams and Harrell were very upset with the preferential treatment Kawhi got. Kawhi would show up late to practice. He would basically dictate when he didn't want to play. And so a lot of people were peeved by that. And it'll be interesting to see how the Clippers come out and hopefully AD and LeBron play, because it'll be fun to watch this game. And we remember last year the Clippers won this first matchup, and everyone was saying, oh, the Clippers are the team to beat, blah, blah, blah. Of course, the Lakers end up winning the title. So it'll be interesting to see how this game turns out. Moving on, we are going to look at some of these Raptors key games. And of course, they open their season against the New Orleans Pelicans in Tampa Bay. So we'll get our first look at kind of what the camera angles are going to look like, what the Tampa Bay arena is going to look like, what it's going to sound like. There's not going to be any fans, so it'll be an interesting setup for sure. And the reason I wanted to highlight this game, besides it being opening night for the Raptors, is that Zion will be in the building, and they recently announced that he won't have a minutes restriction this season, which is incredible because I want to see Zion play as much as possible. And last year they were restricting his minutes, so he'd do something crazy, and then 30 seconds later he'd have to sub out just because everyone's worried about his knee. But now he gets to go full Zion mode, and that'll be really fun to watch, because when he is in flight, whenever he leaves his feet, something incredible happens. And so I'm just so excited to see what's going to look like. I still think Siakam's going to make him look lost on the defensive end, but it'll be our first look to see how the Raptors handle a very potent offensive rebounding threat with the new look centers. The next game that kind of stood out was their January 4th matchup. This will be their first look against the Boston Celtics, going up against the new Celtics lineup without Hayward and adding Canadian Tristan Thompson.
Bit of a revenge opportunity, we hope.
Yes, I would love to see them win that matchup. It's in Tampa Bay, so maybe a little home court advantage, but I don't know how much that's going to factor in playing in Tampa rather than Toronto.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about Toronto, we talk about the crowds, so that's not.
Yeah, a lot of teams, it'll be interesting to see how this works out. We've already seen it in the NFL. A lot of the home adjustments and the home betting and stuff like that has completely changed, because home field advantage means so much less when there's not that scream of 80,000 fans and the opposing team's quarterback can't even hear himself think, right? It just makes a complete difference. And I think that'll be the same way for this NBA season. The next game and stretch of games I want to highlight, it's not necessarily a game in particular, is the Raptors have an absolute gauntlet where they play 6 games in 10 days from January 18th to 27th, but it's not necessarily the number of games, it's who they play. So they start off, it is half home, half on the road. They start off, they play Dallas, which project to be a pretty strong team. Then they play Miami twice in a row. And then they travel to Indiana and play the Pacers twice in a row. And then they finish back in Tampa against the Bucks. So just kind of that stretch of 6 games will be against a couple of contenders. And so it will really help us kind of figure out early in the season where the Raptors fall into those rankings of East contenders and where they situate themselves based on those games.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a theme I saw in the schedule, is they play a lot of games where it's the same team twice in a row, because the NBA is trying to figure out how they can reduce the amount of travel between games. So if you're playing the same team twice in a row, it lets players get a little bit more rest. It also, if there's any COVID precautions, it allows them to stay in that one place for a little bit of extended time, so they're not interacting with other teams as frequently.
That'll be interesting for the matchups, seeing all those second games, like again and again, what adjustments to make.
It'll definitely lead into feeling like a bit more playoff vibes when
And
a team.
even like
Yeah.
when you're on your third or your fourth doubleheader, seeing how the adjustments are made in the second game versus how they're made the first time you have a doubleheader like that.
And I honestly think that favors the Raptors a little bit, because Nick Nurse is definitely a coaching advantage over the majority of the coaches in the league. So I'm not going to complain about that scheduling, and it'll be interesting to see. That second game will have a lot more intensity, I'd imagine. And that kind of leads me into the last stretches of games that I want to talk about. They play Milwaukee twice on the 16th and the 18th of February. And then the following game, they have to travel to Minnesota to play the Timberwolves. So that's kind of a 3-game sprint there. And then right after that, the 21st and 23rd of February, they play the 76ers. And then the next night on the 24th, they play Miami. So that's a string of 6 games that'll be tough. They've got 2 back-to-backs in that stretch. So it'll be interesting to see how they adapt to that. And then that's pretty much it. The last game listed on this schedule for the first half is they're in Boston to play the Celtics again on March 4th. And who knows at that point what the season will look like, where the Raptors are situated. All it could really take is like 2 star players on a team get COVID. They're out for 3 weeks, and that could completely tank a team's chances. So it'll be interesting to see where they kind of finish out at that point in the season.
That's a good point. Basketball, even, I mean, you're seeing that with football, but you just have so much bigger of a team in football that it seems there's more, you can recover a little better, your second string, third string players, whereas even one star player, I mean, we see it with injuries all the time, is capable of like derailing a team's hopes for the season.
Absolutely.
So,
So the teams that are the best at managing and making sure that their whole staff, not just the players, right? Everyone connected with the team is not breaking protocol, because the NBA, they have games so frequently. There's a higher chance for spread, whereas the NFL, like, you've got a full week in between games. So if you even push it a little bit, you're already like 10 days into that 14-day quarantine period. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And then how well the players adapt and commit to such a thing is going to be interesting too, because the players said, no, we don't want to go back to the bubble. We want to do this. So are they going to take COVID seriously? That's going to be a huge factor in this season, like which players are taking it more seriously and how the mental warfare, or not warfare, but how harsh management is going to be, because the stakes we just mentioned are so high. What effect is that going to have on the players? I mean, I'm starting to go a little stir crazy in COVID. I don't have to play sports at an incredibly high level, but if I did, it's taking a toll on everything I do. So how is the lockdown mentality going to affect players over the stretch? And we'll see that more and more as we get closer to that break.
absolutely. And so that kind of wraps up the little schedule preview. We'll get the second half of the schedule later on in the season. Besides that, there hasn't been much NBA news. So I just jump right into my NBA draft update. Over the weekend, super bummed. We were supposed to have number 1 and number 2 in the country play, Gonzaga and Baylor, in a nice matchup of college basketball. And I was looking forward to seeing Jalen Suggs play against much higher competition than he's already faced. But unfortunately, a staff member on Gonzaga tested positive for COVID, so they had to postpone that game. And so it was really disappointing Saturday afternoon, because that game was supposed to play at noon and was going to be really fun to watch. But my weekend got made up for a little bit by watching another beautiful Cade Cunningham performance. He put up 18 points, 8 assists, and 4 rebounds against the University of Oakland. And this game, he's kind of shown a little bit of everything in each game, and had like a scoring performance. He's had a game where he's played some stellar defense, some games where he's played some rebounds, and his size has come into effect. I think this game, the theme of it for him was highlighting a little bit more of his playmaking ability, because he had those 8 assists, but there were so many opportunities on the break where he could have forced a layup in traffic, or he could have forced his own shot, and he seemed to always pass it up for a better look. He threw this great alley-oop on a 3-on-1 break. It seems like he's showing a different side of his game every matchup he has, and it's like he's so good, and I can't wait to see him in the NBA. And to cap it off, we finally got to see him throw down one of his signature dunks. They got a steal fast break. He threw down a nice little windmilly, and yeah, Cade Cunningham. Remember the name. He's coming, and I'll keep everyone updated with each of his games, because he continues to stuff the stat sheet and uh, have some great highlight plays.
Sweet.
That wraps it up for our NBA talk.